Hey, Doug. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing? Does that work out all right with the screen?
I think so. I think once
Okay.
I share, I can move whoever's speaking over to the screen.
Okay. Can you show me what it looks like with the PowerPoint up?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good. Well, that's fine. That's all we need.
I can do about that.
Perfect. That's perfect.
So you can see yourself and the screen.
That's what I think that's ideal. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go back to.
Yeah. You're good. You're good.
Okay.
Hey, Chris. Well, they're not on yet.
Charlie, I see you're on there.
He may be muted. I don't know.
I think so.
Wow, what I thought we might do would be to go through the two basic sections and have a little Q&A after the jurisdiction and then at the end as well. Does that sound all right?
Sure. You're the captain.
Good.
It says that Charlie is connecting audio.
Okay. Is my volume okay?
Yes.
Okay.
So currently, you and I are the only ones that have video and audio. Everyone else is
Yeah, I see that.
muted. Looks like Haley is joining.
Okay.
Charlie, you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. You can't
Yeah.
hear me, huh?
Yeah. No, I can hear you now.
Oh, good.
Hey,
I like your buff.
Yeah. That's my hunting attire that I don't wear unless I'm in the woods, but it suits this pandemic. Well, there's Haley.
I'm so bad about the muting. Hi.
How you doing?
Hey, Haley.
Hi.
Can y'all hear me? This is Pete.
Yes, Pete.
Trying to figure out how to get my, oh, there you go, start video. There you go.
There.
Okay. Figure that out all by
I
myself.
need to change this.
Hey, Gloria.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
How's
How you
everyone?
doing? Good.
Great, thanks. We're being recorded, it looks like.
Yes.
Okay.
The evidence will be held against you. We're waiting on Joe and Mal, Johnny Phipps, and I think Jeanette may join. I'm not sure. I did invite all of the commissioners as well. So we'll give it a couple, 2 or 3 minutes.
I didn't change my name to Laura. It's just I don't know how to get her name off of there.
I was just thinking, I don't know how to get my daughter's name off of mine. So we're in the same boat. I think you have to do it when you sign in.
Oh, wait a minute. I got it.
What do you do? Tell me.
Well, I went to the top right-hand corner and it says rename. And I'm here. I can now change her name to mine. Look at there. I went in the top right-hand corner of my screen, of my picture.
Oh,
and a
Yeah,
little
it's
three
not
dots,
doing it on my,
and 3 dots
it's not
came
doing it
up.
on my iPad. I might have to go on my laptop to do it.
Hey, Joe.
Hey,
So
everybody.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Doug
hey,
Barry.
Joe.
I don't see you. There you are.
Hey, Joe.
Be right back.
Sorry, you need a pass to leave my classroom.
Charlie, is he there?
I'm here.
Oh, we just can't see you.
Why can't you see me?
Let's see.
You don't
You
have
need to hit-
your,
If you hit the 3 little buttons,
Hit
3
play
little,
video.
Where's, hang on now, what do I push?
in
Let me push
your
the,
box, if you hit the 3 little dots, then you can say hit
Play video.
play video. Yeah.
I don't see that, but that's okay. You guys don't have to see me.
Can you see me, Lyle?
Jeanette, I cannot.
Same thing.
Oh, here we go. Same.
Go. So whoever has the phone number ending in 991, could you identify yourself, please? I just unmuted.
Johnny Phipps.
Johnny Phipps. Okay,
Johnny Phipps.
got you.
Yes. I'm good. Even got my name changed.
Doug, that's pretty good full house there. You ready?
All right.
Yeah, yeah. If that's okay, why don't we get started?
All right,
Is that
Doug
okay?
has done a nice PowerPoint, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And
Don't put it up yet though, Lyle. Let me give a little
Okay.
word of introduction. We okay?
you're up.
Ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for turning out for this. This is great. I'm really looking forward to working with you for the next hour and a half and talk about some of the substantive and procedural issues that come before the board. What I've done is prepared a PowerPoint. Half of it has to do with what I call jurisdictional questions as cases does the BZA hear and what their power is. And then the other has to do with the procedural, which I think there's been a lot of interest lately in the procedural issues, how we run our meetings, what's the procedure before a meeting, after a meeting. And so those are the two basic parts. And I thought we would do, if it's agreeable to you, is go through the substantive part first, and then let's take a break, go back to the screen where we can all see, do a little question and answer at that point, then go to the procedural part, save your questions for each section. I think Lyle and I figured out that once the PowerPoint is up, you'll be able to see me, but not anything else other than the PowerPoint. So is that okay with everyone?
Sure.
Good. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Why don't we, you ready to go, Lyle?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I can see a few more folks than just myself, which is always good. So the style of this program is the Bellmead Board of Zoning Appeals, Jurisdiction and Procedure. And today's date is July 14, 2020. Turn the sky. The Bellmead Board of Zoning Appeals, like any municipal agency, all of its powers come from the state legislature. Just as the city of Bellmead has its constitution, the Bellmead Charter is an act of the legislature. So the powers that you exercise and the powers to even create a board of zoning appeals are creatures of state statute. That's found in Title 13 of the Tennessee Code Annotated, and is commonly called the zoning enabling legislation. city ordinances have to be consistent with state law. So not verbatim, they don't have to be verbatim the same as state law, but they have to be consistent with state law, and we can't get too far outside of the authorizing language of the statutes and also the cases that interpret those statutes. One basic thing that you all know is that the Board of Zoning Appeals powers are quasi, or as some lawyers say, quasi-judicial. You act as an administrative decision maker, or even almost like a court, in deciding the cases that come before you based on the facts of those cases, but the Board of Zoning Appeals does not set policy or pass legislation. That's the job of the city commission. So next slide, Mark.
Hold on, I'm gonna mute somebody. Somebody's making a lot of noise.
I'm making too much noise out there.
Probably me.
So let me say, I've got a more detailed outline of this presentation that has like statutory citations and case citations to it. If anybody wants that after the day, just to have, just ask me. These slides are a little more summary than that. So the first area of jurisdiction that boards of zoning appeals have is I call administrative review. And that is where the board hears appeals from any decision of the building official in enforcement of the ordinance or the grant or denial of a building permit. These are decisions that do not involve request for variance or special exception or conditional use permit. You know, it's funny, if you would just sort of travel around Middle Tennessee and see what boards of zoning appeals are up to, you would see a lot more of these than I don't believe we've ever had a case since I've been city attorney, which has been purely an appeal from the decision of the building official that was not also connected with one of the other actions. An example that comes to mind maybe is, you know, under our one of our accessory uses that's permitted under the zoning ordinance is a home office for a doctor physician. And so one of the restrictions of that use is that the medical equipment that is used, that the ordinance says that only consultation and examination normally performed without special equipment found in a treatment room or a clinic may be carried on. And so I was just trying to think of an example. Let's just say somebody comes in and says, look, I found an X-ray machine. It's a home X-ray machine. Why are you saying I can't use it? And Lyle says, I don't believe that fits the terms of our ordinance. Well, that sort of decision by the building official would be appealable to the Board of Zoning Appeals simply because it's his interpretation of the ordinance. As I said, I can't remember a standalone interpretation of the ordinance we've had that's come before our board, but that they may just be a luck of the draw. So next slide, Lyle. As this board knows, we've been hearing a lot. In fact, it seems to be the meat and potatoes of our board of requests for special exceptions and conditional use. Now, one big category of that, and if you haven't studied your Bellmead zoning code, you'll see, but if you have, that there are appendices to the code that talk about different types of uses that require special exception permit. And those are churches and other places of worship, schools, country clubs, and historic sites. And then also there's a section on non-conforming structures. A special exception use or a conditional use is one that under zoning law is compatible with the zone it's in generally, but should be allowed only with specific safeguards in place because of the nature of it. So all these sort of institutional uses, which as you know are typically found in residential zones, not just in Bellmead, but in every city. Then you also see in larger cities like Metro Nashville, things like daycare centers, other uses that belong in residential zones but could have some adverse impacts to the neighbors. they're treated as special exception uses or conditional uses. Most recently, as we know, we've had some of these St. George's Episcopal Church and Bellamy Country Club, I think, has had some additions. So what you're going to look at in those cases are going to be, construction that is incident to their use of their property, and the board's job is to make sure there are safeguards in place, usually with respect to things like screening and buffering the sight or sound of their use. Also, under our code, we have a number of things that are not really uses, and I'm not going to get too deep into that today, but swimming pools are considered a conditional use, greenhouses, tennis courts, and other types of structures or improvements in residential areas. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but like I said, your docket, your agenda has typically got some special exception use requests and conditional use requests every month. Next slide, please, Lyle. And this is the point that I've made before, and right now our zoning ordinance in some ways conflates the two, but special exceptions under the law are the same. Special exceptions are really a use. It's the same as a conditional use and a special exception use are the same thing. It's not supposed to be, as I call it, a lesser species of variance, or a variance light, a variance where you don't have to prove the criteria for a variance. Like I said, I'm not going to really, that's more of a legislative issue. It's a problem the commission needs to address that. It's not a problem you have today because, only if that ordinance were to change, is that going to make a difference. But we're going to continue to enforce the ordinances we have and give you the best advice we can with the ordinances we have. One thing Lyle and I discussed recently is that a conditional use permit must be granted, or a special exception use permit must be granted to any property that meets the conditions specified. So you can't just say you don't get a swimming pool. The board's job is to, if it's a conditional use or special exception use, is to place whatever conditions on the use are necessary to keep that use from being a nuisance or detrimental to neighbors. But you can't, at the end of the day, the property owner may not be able to meet those conditions, but they can't simply be turned down. So a special exception use or conditional use is a use of right from which the board is able to place conditions. So that you may have questions about that in the Q&A, but just wanted to make that point. Next slide, please, Lon. Okay, now, once again, the largest, I would say, once again, if you have some extra time on your hands, which I fervently hope you don't, you go around and hear boards of zoning appeals in Middle Tennessee, the biggest part of their docket is variances. And the variance under state law is where the property owner is actually asking the city for permission to violate the ordinance, to say, look, what this ordinance says doesn't apply to me because I've got a situation, and what's behind that is a legal concept or tradition that every piece of property is unique. And that's really true. Even if you had absolutely square, identical pieces of property right next door to one another, there's going to be some tiny difference between them, whether it be the soils, topography, and that's not enough to grant a variance, but that's what's behind this. So with the variance, you're looking at very specific criteria, and once again, we're looking at this under state law first of all, and you all have heard these before. You veterans of the board have heard these before. I'm going to repeat them now. And so what the applicant will have to show is an exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific piece of property, and I messed up my PowerPoint here, which at the time of the enactment of the zoning regulations was a lot of record, okay? So I think under Bellmead it's 1950. So the first leg of possible exception for variance is that you had to have a lot that was created before we had zoning, and that lot is narrow, shallow, or shaped in a funny way. And the reason for that is if you had lots that have been created since zoning was enacted, that would be the landowner's own fault that they enacted, that they created a substandard lot. Sometimes because of historical circumstances, you've got a piece of property that's triangular or trapezoidal or that sort of thing. And that's where that timing, it has to have been a lot of record as of, well, I think it's August 15th, 1950 in Bellmead to qualify. But then there's an or here, or there is, by reason of exceptional topographic conditions, or other extraordinary and exceptional situation of such piece of property. So this could be things like a monarch tree, a large, iconic monarch tree you didn't want to have to take down because if you violated if you comply with the setback in one direction, you would lose a tree. I think a creek or water course going through your yard, topographic conditions, and things. Topographic, of course, means the lay of the land. Those sorts of things are the sorts of unusual situations that would, establish at least a threshold case for variance. A variance, these situations though cannot be created by the landowner themselves. They can't, that's created hardship. They can't do things to their property or to their situation that create their own problem. Okay, next slide, Mike. And this is where the rubber meets the road. So there has to be this unusual situation and the strict application of any regulation enacted under this part. So that means any part of it. There's one exception I'll get to in one second. That will result in a peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties to, or an exception or undue hardship on the owner. So they've got to show an unusual topographic condition or other situation, and the hardship. And the hardship doesn't mean they have to be, out there in rags rattling a tin cup. It means they can't build a project, and that's the hardship. And the hardship has to be due to the unusual condition or situation. And this is a determination the board has to make. Relief has to be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the zone. What the first clause of that last thing means is it can't be detrimental to the neighbors. I mean, the public good, sure, but somebody who lives 3 miles away has got no stake in whether somebody violates a setback, except they would need to have under that first clause. And then whether it can be done without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance, I've always interpreted that to mean don't make variance decisions that create bad precedents that you have to live with. And which don't distort the meaning of the zoning ordinance in order to grant a variance on the facts of the case. So, a classic case of where a variance might be granted would be, like I said, say you had a lot that was a lot of record as of 1950 that was so small that the normal setbacks for that zone would not permit that owner to expand their footprint, whereas somebody who didn't have an extraordinarily small lot would not have that problem. So he's got unusual situation, he's got hardship, and then you would have to just judge on the facts whether that could be variance could be granted without substantial detriment to public good. Once again, you'd be looking at, and that's why the neighbors, we'll talk about this later on the procedure, that's why the neighbors should come to these hearings, because typically, as you all have seen, or as I've seen, and I think you all have seen, the neighbors go like, I'm fine with Joe and Judy doing this. We're behind them. And you get their letters. You've got it in the record that that's not going to be detriment to public good. And once again, it's not a distortion of the zoning ordinance. If you can point to a fact, you say, look, this lot is small and it's triangular, it's irregular shape. Yeah, they don't get to build their project. So that's the sort of analysis you would make in the case where you would grant a variance. Okay, next slide, Lon. State law controls this. Although it's curious to me that our definition in our ordinance is a little less permissive than state law, and it also adds the category that the resulting home would not be out of harmony with other homes in the neighborhood. That's not really a consideration under granting or a variance. I guess it could be relevant to whether or not it is granted without harm to the public good. I think particularly with our Historic Zoning Commission now in place, that's a concern that, well, you could have things like, what do they call it? The rhythm of the houses with the setbacks. So I'll take that back. There's some two-dimensional concerns about harmony. Once again, if you had a house that was going to come out and be way closer to the street than others on the street, I think these are legitimate concerns, but it's a little odd to me that our definition is narrower. Next slide, one. Oh, before we get to special exceptions, there's no such thing as a use variance. As I said earlier, a variance can be granted for any provision of the zoning ordinance, any aspect of the zoning regulation. That's why lately, when we've had these variances come in the context of conditional use permits issued for swimming pools, giving you that advice, because even though conditional use has to do with something, it has to do with something. So there is this, and the zoning ordinance says the swimming pool must be within the building, within the
Setbacks.
within the setbacks. Nevertheless, if the person can show the criteria for a variance, as we just outlined, that would be a separate consideration, and then you would go into the analysis of whether or not the conditional use permit should be granted. Okay, so the last category of cases that our board hears are special exceptions, and some of these we've already alluded to, already talked about, are special exceptions that are synonymous with conditional use permits: churches and places of worship, school buildings, historic sites, and country clubs. I don't remember having a temporary building come before our board. Do you, Lyle? I know Pete has probably seen it all, but
No.
I don't remember that. It could, but as I said, these are the sorts of special exceptions that the state law is intended to address. So we'll roll the slide. Next slide, Lon. I don't know what happened to my font there. There's the change from black to white is no relevance there. And then we've also got a variety of structures and uses that are treated as special exceptions under our zoning ordinance: accessory buildings and the uses that are intended incident to those, detached garages, living quarters, parking areas in excess of the amounts permitted, fences and walls. As you know, we see a lot of those almost monthly, usually in connection with swimming pool construction. And new slide one. And the criteria for granting a special exception are that it's not out of harmony with the existing development in the neighborhood, and these are summarized. It's a little lengthier in the ordinance. But there's no adverse impact on properties in the immediate area. The proposed use of structures are architecturally compatible. Now somewhat overlaying with the Historic Zoning Commission's jurisdiction, and the conditions and safeguards are in place to protect the character of the community. That's a pretty broad, number 4 is a pretty broad criterion, and almost reads like a legislative judgment, but almost asks the Board of Zoning Appeals to to make a legislative judgment. But once again, I think you've been doing a decent job. I mean, I think we've been doing a decent job getting through that. It's a challenge, and next slide. Finally, this has to do with a new house, new structure, not some of these accessory uses and structures. The construction, this is under subpart 4 of that same ordinance section. The construction of an addition to an existing residential structure or the replacement of an existing residential structure with a new residential structure, not otherwise permitted by this chapter, provided that the board shall determine that. So what Lyle told me, and I think you guys can confirm, is that I think, Lyle, you said you think maybe 80% of the homes in Belmead are non-conforming structures, given that they were constructed before the enactment of zoning, and then once the first setbacks were imposed, or maybe a later series of setbacks, I don't know what the history of the zoning is, many of them already violate existing setbacks. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, it is.
So we've got to find a way the board has got to find a way to deal with this without telling people, no, you can't build. And so we'll roll the next slide. So what we've done is essentially come up with a rule that says with any pre-existing non-conforming structure, it mentions some other things too, that particular dimension, the new construction cannot aggravate that particular, make worse that particular violation, but otherwise would be able to be extended within the building envelope. Is the way I've interpreted how we and once again, they have the same general criteria. I'm a little troubled by number 1. There exists good cause for the expansion. You know, whose cause is good and whose isn't, you're just adding on to your house. When I was the city attorney for Franklin, we used to frequently get the old, we want a variance because we're moving mom down here from Minnesota and she needs a nice sun porch. Well, that's a good reason, but I mean, what if somebody doesn't have a mom in Minnesota? They just want to build a nice sun porch. So number 1, it seems way, way, way broad to me, but the others are the same criteria as relate to the other special exception decisions. Once again, I think we should number these, well, and I understand the reason. We've got to be a way for the city to deal with that many non-conforming structures without just saying we're not going to have any more additions to buildings in the city. Next slide. Okay, we might have gotten through the substantive part. Oh, we're about on time. So if you want to take down the PowerPoint, Lyle, and have a little quick time for questions about what I call the substantive issues, and any questions you have for me or any things you want to put up for discussion, I'm happy to try to answer those.
Hey, Doug, I got a question for you. We're talking about variances, and one of the main items under that was an exceptional.
Yes.
How do we define that? I mean, is it based on other lots on the street on that same?
Well,
I had the exact same
what
question.
That's where I think the Belmead ordinance does help us a little bit. It does talk about other lots on the neighborhood. I think exceptional would indeed have to do with those closest to it in the same neighborhood. And then if it's truly a weird lot, it's a weird lot anywhere. You know, it's built like it's got streams going through it and stuff. It's exceptional almost wherever it is. But yeah, I think if it's an odd lot for that neighborhood, that's certainly a factor. All of these decisions are fact-based, based on particular facts of the case. And that's one reason why I repeat this thing, that every piece of property is unique. It helps us because if someone says, well, you set this precedent over on that property on this street, and my response would be, look, that was a different piece of property, and this board made findings. We'll get to that later. This board made findings about why that piece of property was exceptional. So I hope that answers your question at least a little bit.
Well, let me expand on that. I understand. I think everybody understands an exceptional lot topography challenge of a triangular shaped lot or a creek running through it or whatever. What if we had a situation where everyone on the street had a 3/4 acre lot, but someone came to us in the middle of the block with maybe a 1/2 acre lot, and they can't get a pool on there because of it's smaller. Is that a variance? Or
I think if those lots predated the 1950 deadline and just talking about size, then I believe that would be. I'm not saying you have to grant the variance, but I'm just saying that might be a case for a variance. I would say yes, that's what you're talking about. If you're talking about size alone, then the lots in the neighborhood, that would be relevant.
So even if it's a rectangular lot like all the other lots on the street,
Well, size is a separate category of problem under the state law. So if it's simply the shape is one, it says size, shape, narrowness, shallow.
okay.
So
Let me ask one other thing here.
yeah, sure.
If the variance cannot be created by the property owner, could you give me an example of how they could create a problem, a variance for the?
Well, we had a builder in Franklin one time who came in and created a whole new subdivision and they had all these substandard lots that he created. But you know, I'm trying to think of one where just an individual lot owner would create the problem. I'm sorry, I can't think of a ready example, but where you.
Well, okay, I got one. I think I've answered my own question. They came in at one point and they put in a $100,000 terrace, and now they want a pool, but they don't want to remove the terrace. That would be getting.
Yeah, in fact,
Okay.
it's funny you mentioned that. I had somebody come to me from Brentwood to consult me about a matter like that, very similar. They put in a nice big outdoor barbecue. And they were like, yeah, wait a second. I have to take this down? That's a perfect example. That's a perfect.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got a
Yeah,
question.
I had a question for Lyle. I'm actually surprised that 80% of lots are non-conforming. Like, what are there some major areas that they're all non-conforming, or?
It's typically the houses that were built prior to, I'm going to say the 80s, because those houses were built, people just basically stood on the street and said, I want my house kind of situated over to the right. Then when the ordinance came along for the building envelope or the building setbacks, the houses in Belmead somewhere fall outside of that envelope. It could be
So it's mainly building envelope is what you're saying, non-conforming. Okay.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pete?
I've got a question about corner lots and variances.
Yeah.
Question about corner lots and
Yeah.
variances. Since corner lots have 2 front yards, the building envelope or the setbacks by design are going to be smaller
Yeah.
than the same lot that's not on a corner, right? So does that automatically qualify them for a variance? Because you're going to have a smaller building
I would be hesitant to say anything automatically qualifies a landowner for a variance. I think, and forgive me for not having mastered this, I think we've got a separate ordinance provision about how to treat corner lots. But in a corner lot that's forced to have 2 front yards, I would say does have grounds to ask for a variance because nobody else has 2 front yards. They get, one of them ought to be a side yard or a rear yard, whichever it comes into play. So I would certainly make that argument if I was them.
But can I speak to that? When that ordinance was originally drafted, it was to help lots that could not be developed due to 2 setbacks crossing over each other. And at the same time, it was to help those that had a buildable envelope, an existing home but take away the side street and treat it like it's a lot in the middle of the block. And have, stipulation where they had to put heavy screening or landscaping in the rear so that you didn't see that the house stepped out closer to the side street, if you will, than the other houses
Yeah.
in that street. To treat it like a lot in the middle of the block. You follow me on that?
Yep, that's,
I think the language was written that way. It was definitely written to go before planning commission and help establish a building envelope on a corner lot. But that was the original intent. Unfortunately, the language doesn't point that out.
One thing that you both have triggered a thought about is that Board of Zoning Appeals may place in variance decisions or any decisions it's making, may place conditions on, if you're inclined to approve, may place conditions on that approval if they're ameliorate problems that might be caused by the zoning variance. So that's something to think about.
But the original first stopping point for someone on a corner lot asking for a variance, would it not be to the planning commission first and then
Also, this ability to, that's a unique, if you say so, I have not seen that yet, but.
well, they would be going to the planning commission for
Create a new building envelope.
a variance to extend the building envelope. Yeah.
That's an unusual grant of authority. But yes, if that's the way it works, then that's the way it works. Planning commission setting their envelope. We don't have a lot of active new subdivision in Belmead. In fact, I've not seen any, but the planning commission has an interesting set of powers, one of which is to create a new building envelope, and that makes sense what you're saying. Anybody on this substantive stuff?
yeah, let me,
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Pete.
Well, to continue on the same area, we just had a house come before the board last meeting on Deer Park Circle and Deer Park Drive, I think, right on the corner. And with the building envelope, as the codes are written now, the house in there was way outside the building envelope, and they wanted to put a pool in the back, and it was going to be outside the setbacks. But my understanding in that meeting is the board could not consider a pool under the variance condition because I don't really know why. that's why I was really I questioned that at the meeting.
Sort of
Why we couldn't consider the pool under
Part B of this seminar is going to be about procedural due process. So I don't want to talk about any case we previously talked about, particularly if they have a possibility coming back to the board. But in general, I have recently, when we've had cases before the board on whether or not swimming pools, which are designated conditional use, could nevertheless be considered if they're outside the building envelope under the criteria of variance. I think they may be, because any provision of the zoning ordinance can be subject to the variance. And that's my opinion, and it remains my opinion. So I do think it should have been. I thought we had done that. But in that particular case, well, I really don't want to talk about particulars.
We did it in a previous case, the one off of
St. George Place.
I don't think we have particular cases here. Okay, I tell you consistently what we advise the board that let's not talk about particular facts of the cases we've heard or may hear again, because that's not fair to those people. Maybe have one more question to this.
I have a question on harmony in the neighborhood, harmony within the neighborhood. And it does apply to a specific case, but isn't it, can you define it generally? Because I was confused.
It's a Zen Buddhist concept. And if you don't get that,
Yes.
I think harmony in the sense of a granting of variance as opposed to architectural compatibility, which is more the province of our newly created, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
To do with things like what's called the rhythm of the street, another musical term, where, particularly with something like a setback, it's inappropriate to have a house 20 feet closer to the street than the others, where the average setback is is greater than that. So that's how I understand harmony in the variance.
So you said rhythm of the street. So just the street that it's on, where it doesn't apply across the whole neighborhood?
It has to do with how far, how high, how tall they are, how far they are from sidelines, and it tends to be some consistency with those. That's why you have citywide zoning standards on a particular street. Yeah, I think that's what that means. I think we're talking about the structures, whether they've been that way historically or not. We shouldn't have irregular setbacks or irregular heights of buildings or irregular anything else that can physically irregular, mounts and hard surface. All these things ought to be done in a way where there's some harmony. That's how I understand it.
Well, I know, but my issue is whether it's for the whole neighborhood or is it for that street? Because I've always assumed it was for the whole neighborhood, but there was.
I think you can vote. I think you may, if that's your interpretation. I think that's how you should vote. There's no set answer for that in our zoning ordinance. I think something like that. My experience, I'm trying to think of cases that have been decided on that basis, would be talking about, homes that are within a certain area that might be affected by a disharmonious decision. I don't know how Lyle was interpreted.
Well, the specific. You didn't want to get into, but the Linwood Gate.
No. Ixnay on that. So we're not going to talk about particular cases.
Okay, but it was an issue. So that still is a question in my mind.
If something like that or any other case comes before us on that issue, make your opinion known and say that in your opinion, the issue of harmony could be greater than the street, could be greater than neighborhood. There's no clear answer in our ordinance.
Okay.
Okay.
Can we go back to your comment regarding approval of a building, of a swimming pool outside of the building envelope?
Yes, sir.
You said that because of the size of the lot, and I think you also included the fact that if it were a quarter lot on a hypothetical situation,
right,
you may approve it. Well, this is what troubles me about the variance section of the code. It says that specifically, first of all, you said that a variance, you have to strictly apply the language of the statute in order to grant a variance. Those were your words. You said that strict application.
Sure. Okay.
Is that correct or not? I don't know. That's what you said.
I don't remember it had to be strictly applied, but I think we have to go through the criteria for a variance and apply them. I don't think I used the word strict, but that's okay.
Okay. But it says if the property had on August 16, 1950 an extraordinarily unusual shape, size, is that what you're talking about? Size or topographic feature? So size is one criteria.
Well, size is one criterion. The Bellmead ordinance is more restrictive than state law in that respect. It doesn't have we don't have the power to set criteria that are restricted in state law. So size as of that day is a criteria. Yes.
Okay. Now, if you go to the conditional use section, first I know if you have a hypothetical case that comes before the board asking for a variance, and suppose we find there is a variance there, you go to the conditional use, it says that the Board of Zoning Appeals can approve a conditional use for a swimming pool may be constructed or erected within the building envelope. How do you interpret may be constructed within the building envelope?
I would think that is I think that's a requirement. It may be not like may or may be or may not be, but it's required to be, shall be constructed in the building.
Well, that's the way I interpret it as well.
Well, but I think the whole point of a variance is that you're granting you're creating exceptions under certain circumstances. I'm not saying you have to be liberal in granting them. Some people never grant them. Metro gives them out like Hellman County. Williamson County, you'll never get one. But those are the hard standards of the zoning ordinance. And the variance says you can get an exception for even that if you can show this unusual situation. So the burden is on the party seeking the variance to establish that. You don't have to give it to them. It's not a matter of right.
No, I understand, but I'm trying to compare the two sections. You got a variance requirement and you got a conditional use requirement. If you find that they meet the criteria of variance, but then you go to the conditional use and it says that shall be constructed within the building envelope. How do you reconcile the two?
The building envelope is the the standard from which you're seeking the variance. And let's just say under the circumstances of that case, you are going to say, look, we're going to make that standard is not going to apply to you because you've got a funny little shaped lot or whatever the things you establish. And the conditional use for swimming has to do with things like external effects of having a noisy, splashy swimming pool. So if you establish your right to a variance, then you're going to go in on what are the criteria for granting a conditional use for a swimming pool, even if it's within the building envelope. And that would be things like, is there adequate screening? Is there an adequate fencing? Et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I understand it, Joe. We're going to go round and round on this, I'm afraid. But.
Well, another way of saying, are you saying that if we find that there is a variance, does that override the conditional use requirements?
Did I say that?
No, I'm asking.
I didn't say that. If you find there's a variance, then they're at least in the game. They've got a chance to ask for it. As I said earlier, is with the conditional uses, you can't say, no, you don't get it. If you say, look, we think you're entitled to a variance, then you're in the conditional use box. And then, as I said, you don't say some get it and some don't. You go like, look, because of this, you're going to have extra. You don't have to have 2 lines of evergreens. You're going to have just lay on the conditions as need be to make sure that conditional use doesn't have a negative impact on the neighbors, but you can't prevent them from having that.
No, I understand that part. The part that troubles me is the requirement that it be within the building envelope. That's very specific to a conditional use. It is not.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Any provision of the zoning ordinance is variable if they can show they're entitled to a variance. If you don't want them to have a variance, don't give it to them. If you haven't established hardship, whatever. But once you've established the right to a variance, then that particular, of course it's particular. Any provision, as I said earlier, any provision of the zoning ordinance, with the exception of use, and I don't mean conditional use, I don't mean something like a structure like a swimming pool, but saying like, I want a variance because I want to have a fruit stand in my front yard. What's called a use variance. Those are not permitted. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about criteria for a conditional use permit. I don't know. I don't think our time permits us to keep on going around and around this with all due respect. So if that's a decision you feel like is unwise, we need to talk about amending the ordinance to talk to the commission about it.
Can I ask one more question regarding, because we've had several cases where they had to come back because they said special exception and then they had to come back as a variance. Is there a way to screen it at the beginning before it comes to us?
I've got a little section on that. I've got a little section about screening. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll come to that. Okay. Why don't we hold that quick?
Okay.
I think to use our time well, we need to move on. I don't want to take all day. Everybody okay?
Yep.
Let's move the procedure. Thank you, Joe. Okay. Right to Gloria's point. So the Board of Zoning Appeals jurisdiction is appellate. That means that it doesn't have original authority to go out and enforce the law of the city. It has to do with, it hears cases that come to it because there's been an application for a building permit or a permit, a denial of the permit, and those are the cases sitting. So you're right, Gloria. The cases in the first instance come to allow the building official. The question is, and I think I can hear your question is, to what extent can we either weed them out, reclassify them, and say this ought to be a variance, this ought to be a application for special exception. And absolutely, he should and does do that with the applicants. Sometimes we get some that are misnomer. One, and I'm not going to get into this today, one of my beefs has been the confusion of special exceptions when talking about a structure as opposed to a use. Oh, I lost my video. Who's me there? There we go. But I think the thing is that Lyle can have somebody who's sitting in his office and says, look, and Lyle can explain to him, is blue in the face. Look, you don't have a good case for a variance here. You've got a square lot. You got no hardship. You got nothing. But the thing is, the guy can still ask, and he can file a appeal that's fruitless and a waste of time. But Lyle does not have the power to say, look, go away. People file dumb lawsuits all the time. They file dumb BZA appeals. We'll come back to that. I think that's on some people's minds. So let's move through this part of it. We'll come back to the whole issue of how you characterize the appeal. I think that's important. I think it's
just on that point, just quickly, can Lyle deny a special exception? Say, I'm not going to take that as a special exception. We can take it as a variance, but I can't take it as a special exception.
I think he needs to do his best to characterize it as how he sees it. And yes, I mean, right now, I think when you got somebody who comes in, if I were the lawyer for the landowner, I don't know what I would do. I think I would try to characterize it both ways. Just while these opposed people are not represented, but I would think an either or situation, because you know, the criteria for the two don't exactly overlap. They're similar, particularly if you're talking about a structure. Is that my something on my side making that noise, or who's that? Got a beeping or scraping?
I don't hear it, Doug. I tell you, if everybody would mute themselves until Doug is through, it may help.
Anyway, let's do come back to that. I don't want to take your entire afternoon to that. I think Lyle should do his best to write it up as he sees it. But it is a problem if they are having entitled relief under one section and not the other. Let's have the next slide, Ron. So this is something you already know. I apologize for the inconsistent. Talk about lack of harmony. Talk about on my PowerPoint here, the inconsistent margins. So as you know, under our ordinances, there's once the application is made and turned down, the BZA case is set up. It's direct mail notice to the appellant and the directly affected property owners. That is a sign posted on the property 5 days before the hearing of the description of relief sought. This is also on the city website. This is all part of due process. Next slide. One question that might be surprising to me, you know, who are the parties to an appeal before the board of zoning? We're going to need to get that metallic sound stopped. That's really a distraction.
I don't hear it, Doug.
Maybe it's in my end. I don't know what that is.
I don't hear it either.
Okay, good. Well, if y'all aren't hearing it, I don't know what's going on. I'll just do my best. So you've got the appellant, that is the property owner, and you've got as we say in the zoning business, you got the neighbors, and those are the affected property owners. And let's see, Lyle, what are we getting there? Adjacent owners plus across the street as a rule, or how far do we go on that?
Contiguous neighbors.
Yeah. You know, that's the rule that they get within 1,250 feet, which is a quarter of a mile. Unbelievable. And then remember this, the city is itself a party before its own Board of Zoning Appeals. That's kind of counterintuitive, but remember, the Board of Zoning Appeals is not the captive of the city. It's an independent tribunal set up by the city to hear these cases with everybody's rights being considered. And there's actually a case, if I say in the last 5 years, it was in the last 10 years, where the metropolitan government appealed the decision of its own Board of Zoning Appeals, and the court held, yeah, you got standing to do that. You're a party. So Lyle is essentially there representing the city administration, property owners, the neighbor property, and you've got the appellant, the property owner who's asking for it. Okay, next slide. Wow, this is really a mess. I apologize for that. Yeah, I swear when I went to bed, it was in good shape. Gremlins got into it last night. So the question is, what evidence is the board hearing? And this is the information provided to the board prior to the hearing. You've got the application for building permit, whatever drawings and surveys and things that person is relying on. And then prior to the hearing, the appellant and any of the affected parties, as the neighbors, may submit written information, letters of support, objections, and all of this should come through the building official, through Lyle's office. And then he would provide it in an orderly way to the board's own, either with their packets or at the hearing itself. And sometimes, as you know, Pete, from your experience, Joe, you get letters handed to you at the hearing. So it's incumbent on us to keep a good record. I have there at the very bottom of the slide where I say a problem is ex parte communications, that is communications with the board members prior to the hearing by people who have an interest. And I copied this policy, I think it was Metro's, as a policy of the board, just to give you an idea of what an ideal or perhaps idealistic policy would look like. And that is, it shall be the policy of this board that no member shall discuss the merits of any pending case with any person having interest in the case prior to the public hearing. Further, any interested party wishing to provide written information to the board prior to the public hearing, including electronic communication, must place such information in the public record to the staff of the board prior to providing such information to board members. So this is kind of an ideal we should strive for. Email is a monster, guys, and I can just tell you, I'm in the middle of a zoning case in Chattanooga right now where I represent the neighbors, and the board was obligated, the city was obligated to all of its records pertaining to the thing. They didn't turn over emails, it possibly reflected communications, and I asked them to do so, and we got 500 emails. Just so you know how crazy that can get. So flip the next slide. Wow. Next slide. So I'll come back to it. But email is not our friend in this thing. So I would strongly urge you. I know you don't. I don't see any. Nobody's copying me on, which is fine. Don't email amongst yourselves about a case. And I would allow. Don't email to the board as the board. You can send them information, but always remember, just assume the reply all button on your computer is broken. No discussion should take place before the meeting. This is a little quick war story on due process. This was a Historic Zoning Commission case and not a Board Zoning case. I was on the Metro Historic Zoning Commission shortly after this thing went down. We had, anybody remember or familiar with the old school building there on Byron up there? Really, it was designed by the Nashville architect Edmund Keeble. It was a neat old building, and Metro had it and auctioned it to a private developer. It was under historic zoning protection, but they had a claim that the economic hardship was such that they ought to have that removed, and they'll be entitled to do their development. This is already short circuit. And what happened was, of course, the developer had funds, and they submitted engineering reports and expert reports about the economic hardship. And the staff, the zoning staff, the historic zoning staff, didn't have the resources to do much except to say, no, that's not right. Well, in the midst of all this, one of the commissioners, who's a good guy, I know him, served with him, he took it upon himself to email the staff and basically give them some, he was in the real estate business, give them some ideas about how to rebut the developer's position. And this was, of course, the time this got to the Court of Appeals, and the emails were not turned over at the trial until the trial court proceeding. And the trial court and the Court of Appeals cited this as evidence of bias by the commissioner, said he should have recused himself, and then remanded the whole case from the hearing where he was not going to participate. So I'm not, let me say this, this isn't a scold. I'm not seeing that really with this board, and I'm just glad that I'm not, and I'm just, as I said, disregard this as a cautionary tale about what it means to be above board and careful about talking about a case outside of the hearing process. Next slide. A quick summary of all this. Why is this not a good idea? Why is this not legal? Got to deal with the Sunshine Law. All of our boards and agencies are subject to the Open Meetings Act of Sunshine Law. It's what that means is that discussions, not only decisions, but deliberations towards a decision must take place in an open meeting, and therefore any discussions about a matter that's going to come before the board that are not included in that are illegal to people. You've got a due process problem, which I alluded to, this Byron Avenue matter. And then the state statute requires there be a complete record of any proceedings before the board if there's an appeal. And so once again, if you have discussions outside of the building, outside of the case, unless you've got a court reporter following you around wherever you go, you're not going to have a complete record. And lastly, as I continue to say, watch out for email. It's changed the way we live and changed the way we practice law. Those of you lawyers know, and I would just, if you have a question for me, certainly just call me. We talked about communication with Lyle during the process. I think if you're dealing with very basic issues about the matter, things if you're having trouble reading a site plan, which I know I do, I wasn't born knowing how to do that either. That would be okay, but any discussion that would be about the merits of a matter that's coming before you is problematic. And if there's a record made of it, that will be made part of the record. Next slide, Lon. Enough about that. Some little tidbits. As you all know, 3 members or alternates at a meeting is a quorum. So you have 5 members. If you've got 3 there, you have a quorum to do business. And then it's the majority of those present constituting a quorum is able to make a decision. So you could have as many as two votes to reverse, modify, or uphold a decision of the building official at a meeting. I have not seen that happen yet either. We've seen with our panel of alternates and so forth. Pretty much, we had a weird number of people. We had 4. Unmute yourself. Unmute you.
Except for churches and schools.
Yeah. And that's what is that? A 3 votes required, or
2/3, which is 4 out of 5.
majority of the entire board?
It's 2/3, so it'd be 4 out of 5.
Thank you. Good point. Thanks for calling that, because we had that very thing come up in the last St. George's case. Thanks for reminding me. Next slide. Next slide. So our current procedure, which I think is a good one, it seems to have, I have not had a problem with it. As you all know, introduction of the process, the overall process by the chair. And I think he also goes through the possibility of appeal, the order of business. The building official first then summarizes the item, and now lately is making a recommendation. The appellant speaks. Questions and answers to the appellant. The affected parties speak. The neighbors, I suppose they could also be subject to question and answer. And then eventually you close the public portion and the board then deliberates and decides. We're going to get to this at the end. I think there's you know, maybe we ought to consider a bylaw limiting the time that people may speak. Typically, I know in Metro, each party gets 10 minutes, and even the appellant has to reserve time for rebuttal. So if you go in there and the appellant's got 10 minutes, they'll go, I've done this and I've seen others do it against me. You go up there and say, Your Honor, members of the board, I want to take 8 minutes and reserve 2 minutes for rebuttal. And those time limits are pretty strictly enforced. Now, that it is extended during times when there's Q&A, and that can make it still go on longer than perhaps it should. I'm kind of a let the people be heard sort of guy. I think at the end of the day, that's maybe cathartic, and also ensures you that nobody's going to claim they didn't get a hearing. Some situations recently that have gotten a little ragged, maybe just because of the Zoom thing. And
Doug, can I say something right there on that point? We've had a case in the past where, and I'm not going to be specific, where the appellant was repetitive and went, continued on and on.
right.
And I wanted, you want to be respectful and give them an opportunity to speak, but likewise, it's taking everybody's time.
Yes.
So there's sometimes at some point, and I struggle with this honestly, to say, all right, enough's enough. I wouldn't say it that way, but also if I cut off the public portion, and they typically come back.
Yeah.
And I.
Yeah, Joe, I couldn't agree more. And I think, however you want to say it, first of all, both you and Pete have been nothing but courteous. And I think, to say, Mr. So-and-so, we need to wrap it up, or however you want to put it, it might be helpful to have a bylaw that establishes a time limit. Sometimes, unfortunately, the board members reopen it by saying, I have a question in their deliberations. Say, well, I have a question for the appellant or for the neighbor X. So, it's not, I've sat through a lot of these in a lot of different jurisdictions. We're not badly with that, but it can be a little frustrating for sure.
We're not a Supreme Court, are we?
You are the Supreme Court.
We're not before the U.S. Supreme Court where you have the bell goes off and you're done.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, these guys need to, and Lyle needs to remind them, not that he doesn't do it, they need to come prepared to prove their case, and we don't need to give them we're a very friendly board. It's a small city, and I get all that. It's not as formal as it could be. That's not only critique, but I don't see it as being a terrible problem. I want to talk about this sort of thing. Maybe one more slide, Lyle. This is one that Pete has always been, and Joe has been very scrupulous to mention, and I couldn't agree more. And I got to thinking about it. Now, what does this mean in the context of what we do? So I just thought I'd write it down. This is from a case, I can't remember the style of the case, Martin versus Sizemore. And it talks about when there's conflict of interest in the zoning case. And it talks, first of all, about personal interest bias, where the board member will gain or lose fairly directly from the decision. Of course, the property owner himself is the first person in question. I would say a neighbor who's close enough to receive direct notice of the meeting would be another person who should immediately refuse to disqualify themselves. And then maybe not on this board, I know in the Historic Zoning Commission, we have folks who are also design, architectural, building contractor type professionals. And I think some of the group who's listening to this might fall in that category, and they would have the sense to realize if it was their project, they would qualify themselves from sitting on a panel to make it. The second one is of interest, and I'm trying to think, is bias or prejudice against a party, either as an individual or as a member of a group. I mean, that takes a lot in there. It could be just an old personal dislike of the person. It could be that they're your law partner. It could be that they're your child. It could be if this talks about against the party and not for them. I would think it would work either way. bias for or against the party. And then finally, a bias stemming from the prejudgment of disputed issues of fact. And that's where they got my friend, was Alan the Kuiper, you may know him. He was on the Charts Zoning Commission. I got him on that case. I started the Byron Avenue case. They said, look, if you're out there ginning up information to defeat this proposal, your mind's made up. So that was proof of bias, and you should have disqualified the government. That's what you did, and may undermine the entire decision. So I'm not sure anybody's under any confusion about what this term meant, but I thought it might be helpful just for me to see again what are the possibilities of the conflict of interest. I can't think anything worse than somebody being a neighbor down the street has ever been brought to my attention. Pete, can you think of anything that's
Not off the top of my head, no.
people are usually over. You can't be too scrupulous about it, but people are being very careful about this in life. Next slide. Court review is by petition for writ of certiorari. It's on the record alone, the rarest of circumstances that you can expand the record. And one issue that arises, in fact, it's arisen with me in a lawsuit I've got right now, is the record should include anything that the board members learn outside of the hearing. So that's how that
Doug, if you can hear me, your computer froze up.
You're froze.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. The decisions of the board are to be sustained unless the action was arbitrary, capricious, or unlawful. That is a really high bar, and for all of our benefit, decisions of municipal agencies courts give them a lot of deference, and so that means that you really have to mess up if you get a court to overturn a board of zoning appeals decision. The standard of evidence is material evidence, which means the court will not say, yeah, we disagree with you, board. We think that there's more evidence this way than that way. The word material suggests it needs to be strong evidence. But material evidence just means any evidence that would support the board's conclusion. Now, this is coming to something that I take responsibility for not being strict about this as I should have been. Every decision we're making, whether variance, conditional use permit, special exception, standard use, I read our ordinance as requiring, and this is a state law formulation, but it's written implicitly into all of our ordinances. It is that every decision should include a statement of the reasons for the board's action as part of the motion, including such findings of fact and statements of material evidence as the board may deem pertinent. Now, we don't have to be, have 15-minute long motions, but, and I noticed, I think, Pete, we talked about this more than once. Joe was chairing one of them, maybe on the St. George's thing, where the special exception used for churches actually requires there to be a recitation of these standards. But even with respect to variance, I mean, Joe, getting back to your point about not wanting to, I think your point about not wanting to grant these things willy-nilly and say, look, we agree to grant a variance in this case, and here's why. The outcomes established in an unusual situation of his lot due to the triangular shape and the fact that it's smaller than other lots on the street. 2, just do it right down, just checklist it down there, and I'll try to be better about making sure we do that, because that is, I think, implicit in what we should be doing. So next slide, maybe the last one. And this is my questions to you all, some of which we've already touched on. We've got rules of procedure that are made a part of our ordinance. State law doesn't require the BZA to have its own rules, but it does give us the authority to enact supplementary rules. I have never seen them. They may be buried in the file somewhere, because I will say our preamble is such a good one that strikes me that has been incorporated into a rule somewhere. But my question to you all is, do we need additional rules? One thing that occurs to me recently is time limits on presentations. And another thing that a lot of cities have is there's a bar on any resubmission within a certain time period. So if you ask for relief, you can't turn people down forever. You can't say no, nevermore. But, you know, most cities have 6 months or a year, at least 6 months, but sometimes a year. Say, look, don't come back. Don't bring this case back to me unless something has changed. And that's that way. Just I haven't seen this as a chronic problem with the Delmead, but that's something we might consider. So I am through and glad to have further discussion and questions.
Doug, I thought it was a rule that I believe, Pete, you correct me, aren't they allowed to come back 3 times?
I don't know.
Pete, haven't we done
Yeah.
that?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that is a rule. I think we've been discussed, but I don't think it's ever been.
We have
ever
a
been a
rule
rule.
that says that they can't come back, excuse me, Pete, interrupt. They can't come back at all if they're in default of a prior order of the board. I meant to mention that, as you know that. And there's one other little deal we have. But I'm interested in you all's thoughts, particularly about time limits at the hearings. I don't see how that could hurt.
Well, regarding that, let me ask. Public would be limited to time as well as the subject, or just the public?
Not the, well, I would say yes. The appellant, the owner of the property would get, let's say we give him 10 minutes. And anybody, if people opposed, 10 minutes. And so they would behoove them to, if it's a big deal, not per person, but what you see in I guess, larger cities is you'll have something's a big deal. I have 50 people out there against it, and they'll have a lawyer or one person speaking for them. Let me check and see how Metro does that bylaw. I know they don't allow each person 10 minutes. But
So you're saying 10 minutes for that appellant, period, no matter who's.
10 minutes for the appellant, and then I have to think about how to handle the people who might be opposed to it. People who support it, you know, it's other than just turning in a letter, I don't know why they would have to be heard at all.
So would the,
Could I make a suggestion? I don't think that in all situations the 10-minute time limit would be appropriate. Like, for example, on the St. George's stuff, there were so many people, and there's just no way we could have gotten that done in 10 minutes. So if there's a way, I mean, I hate to get in a situation where you have to overrule your own rule. I guess you could do it based on the number of people present at the meeting. You know, like, I don't know, 1 to 5 people is 10 minutes, something like that.
You could put in a rule that the board could make exceptions in cases.
Okay.
Well, you know, I'd like to say this. Has it been a problem? I mean, if it hadn't been a problem, do we need it? Do we need a time limit?
Yeah.
I can only think of one time when I asked the architect. I told him, I said, we got it, and and shut it down. That's the only time I can remember ever feeling like it just drug on way too long.
I mean, I don't know if this is the case, but to me, since I've been on the board, it sometimes feels like the procedure is so, every meeting, the procedure is very different. And I think even for us as board members, like, we are so outside of the process of taking questions and going in session and going out of session that it is unclear when is that public portion of the time and when is not. And I think a lot of times, even between ourselves, we don't realize that the time to ask questions of the guests is in that beginning period when we're out of session. And then we don't even think about it. We wait till we're all together talking and we did have questions for them. So I think there's a lot of that I feel like would be really helpful for us to go over if we have time, because I think that's one of the more problematic areas for this board. I mean, I don't know what y'all think, but.
One thing that many boards do is the chair would simply say, once the applicant, the appellant, and he just say, are there any questions from the board? You know, ask the board, do you have any questions of the appellant? Do you have any questions of this person, or do you have any questions of the appellant or others who've spoken, and then just keep on working that until there's no more questions, and then cut it off. And there's going to be a rare circumstance where, because for whatever reason, you want to reopen it, and you know, it's not the end of the world. It's tough. It's tough to cut people off who want to.
Right. But I feel like, again, I mean, and I don't know how strict we want to be with it, but there is still that process for, like, without objection, we're going to go out of session again. We sort of never get to the process, you know, of like formally doing that. And that's a vote too, you know? I mean, to go back out of session once the chair has called it, you know, it's like, we're really supposed to give opportunity for objection. And if a majority of the board does not want to go back out of session, I mean, and maybe that's too advanced. I don't know, but I'm just putting it out there.
It's not too advanced. I would say that the chair saying without objection typically takes care of it 90% of the time.
Agreed.
Object, I want to stay, then the chair put it to the vote. If you got to the point where you couldn't agree on whether to close the public hearing.
I think what I'm getting at is, I'm not sure. Well, I don't feel like everybody feels as comfortable with the Roberts Rules of Order as, you know, they maybe could, and that you know, there's a lot of confidence in that, in the vote that you're making based on, you know, you being, you know, procedurally correct. But everybody may feel great about it, and I could be wrong. It just seems a lot of times like we're just like, is that right? Did we do that right? The motions are a lot of times, I mean, they are questionable, you know, and I don't know.
Robert's Rules kicks in obviously once the board starts to deliberate, not before.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of a Robert's Rules junkie. I take it personal if you think it's gotten bad. I'll start.
Well, it's not you. I just think as a whole, I mean, I've never like, I mean, I just haven't had a lot of experience with it, but I've never sort of been onboarded in the sense as a new board member. And I did sort of get thrown in sort of in the middle of, I don't know, but it may be helpful at some point to just sort of do, I mean, and maybe nobody else needs it. It's fine with me. I just thought I'd point it out. It wasn't a personal dig, Doug, sorry.
I'd like to know what everybody else thinks about that, because Haley, there are times when I know we go back and forth, and it seems like we don't really have a true cutoff of the public portion because the board members seem to have questions, and so I'm kind of like, I don't want to tell the board member don't ask a question. On the one hand, on the other hand, there needs to be some kind of in a way there needs to be some kind of a limit as to when the public portion stops or when it opens again. And I understand what you're saying. So what does everybody else think about that?
Sometimes during discussions, new questions come up, or sometimes during this discussion, the applicant hears something that he'd like to clarify or she would like to clarify. So they ask if they could, you know, that they could speak. And it's a small community, and I just think that, you know, we're trying to do the best we can for the citizens as well as for the city. And if there's more information that would influence us, I think to tell them we don't want to hear it would be a bad choice. So, but it should be the exception and not the rule. I could agree with that. But
I agree with a slightly informal kind of do it as we go. Maybe up to Doug or to Lyle to, when people go on and on and on, to enforce it, you know.
I think that's the chair's job. I don't want to influence things. So I'm like Pete. I think both. Nobody hates the ragged meeting more than I do, and people get to going on and on. It drives me nuts. But you know, what the heck? It just part of some of it just comes with the territory. You know?
I think where I was going with that is I think sometimes for the chair, it would be nice to be able to stand behind the procedure in an effort to not offend someone. And there are times when they have to do that for the whole board. And I do think it would be nice, you know, for that to be the case. But I get it. I mean, yeah, it's a small town. Everybody's going to see everybody, you know, the next week or whatever. But just thought I'd point it out.
So the question, I want to ask a question about the, when we make a motion, when we get to the point, I mean, if it's time to move on, but when we make a motion and and the chair is going to have to lay out all the reasons that we just discussed about why this variance, why the board is making that decision.
The person making the
What do
motion.
Yeah.
The person making the motion should state those reasons. And that's why I say I need to be there to help you. If you're making that motion, I try to remind you that we need to, it's not the chair's job. So the person making the motion needs to say, I move for variance because of X, Y, Z. If you don't do that, then I'll try to be more alert to helping with that.
Because I think most of our motions have been, you know, we move that the application for a variance is, you know, stands as listed or whatever, or as submitted.
There may be some shortcut formulations we can use, and particularly if you're going to grant somebody's relief and nobody's out there opposing it, there's very observing that procedural nicety come back to haunt us. It's just a good habit to be in, and I think on things like, for example, St. George's approvals where you had to do that, and it was highly controversial. We were not going to let that happen without that getting in the record. I get it, Gloria. I just that's on me. I put that on my list of things.
While we're talking, I got on YouTube and looked up how to run a meeting with Robert's Rules. There's about 4 or 5 really good looking videos. If anybody wants to check those out, I can send the links. It's just mastering the 3 most important motions. I mean, it's just a good way to tailor the meetings from. If anybody's interested, I'll send it out.
I think I'd like you to send it to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Can I shift gears and ask a different question? Special exceptions. Why don't we just get rid of them? Make everything a variance, make it easier on the board, easier on the appellant, have conditional use and a variance only. Is there anything wrong with that? I mean, I realize the ordinance would have to be rewritten, but it seems to be a real tripping point.
I thought at one point we talked about getting rid, that we weren't using special exception anymore, but clearly it's a law, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So can you?
if I may respond to that, Lyle, because I put that in that thought in the mix 3 years ago. There are, as long as you understand that a special exception is synonymous with a conditional use, there's some special exceptions that we grant and consider and grant that are consistent with that. To me, where we're talking about special exception and we're talking about a structure, then I think that's problematic. I think that is improper granting of a variance without proving the criteria for a variance. So that's something obviously the commissioners are going to have to consider rather than this board. For the time being, the law is the law, and we're going to try to figure out a way to continue to get through this.
Okay. So I have a question on that exact point. So I wrote down on my notes, like on your PowerPoint, you equated the two as the same, conditional use and special exception.
They are the same.
Okay. So, but we still need the distinction.
Under state law, they are the same. Our ordinance
Okay.
has some special exceptions which are treated as conditional uses. It has others, though, where it talks about a special exception granted for a structure.
Hmm.
And that's something that's been part of the Bellmead ordinance, I gather, for 15 to 20 years. And particularly, we've got some regulations that talk about architectural compatibility, which are now the province of the Stark Zoning Commission. I think it's going to take some time and thought to retrofit that. Introduced an ordinance before the board in January of 2018. It didn't get anywhere. And I think that the Board of Zoning Appeals has worked hard to steer its way through that with a series of ambiguities. But this is really not, no offense, but this is really not this board's prerogative. I mean, if y'all are not super attached to it, it makes me feel better that we consider changing the ordinance, because I don't see granting special exceptions for structures. I think it's a legal non sequitur to talk about. Good.
So grants to get rid of that and rewrite it, it only applies to churches, schools. I mean, what are your feelings on it?
Anything that's a use, this is my interpretation. If it's a use, you can treat it as a special exception use. You can, if it's a structure, you're talking about something that's a variance disguising itself as something else. That's the way I look at it. But
I've got a question along those lines. If an applicant comes on to Lyle and says, I would like to get a special exception for a conditional use for a swimming pool, and it's outside the building envelope, but he asks for a special exception and it's outside the building envelope, can Lyle say, I'm not going to write that? I'm not going to fill out an application? Or does he have to say, is he obligated to say, you can take it in as a variance, but you can't submit it as a special exception because the board doesn't have the authority to approve it? I'm just trying to figure out, when can Lyle just say, I'm not going to submit that?
he can't. I don't think Lyle can ever do that. He wants to. My feeling is this, and I told Lyle this, even though I've ranted about certain aspects of what we call special exceptions. As long as they're an ordinance of the city, I don't make the ordinance laws of the city, and I don't strike them down. So if that's on the books and our board commission chooses to let it stay on the books that way, I got to figure out a way to get that through there and explain the board's decision making has gone on. So I think it would be better if it were repealed, but right now, until it is, I don't declare things unconstitutional.
So what Lyle should do is say, you'll never pass the special exception. I'll write it up as a variance.
Yeah.
Because we don't have authority, then we don't have authority.
Well,
we don't have authority to approve a conditional use outside the building envelope if it's not a variance.
anytime you don't have authority, it's got to be treated as a variance. Okay.
Right.
We're talking about different subjects here. I don't mean to. This is a good discussion, but I think we're in need of some amendment to the ordinance. And I think part of it has to do with what we've already just been talking about, and also judgments about, architectural compatibility and such as that. That's clearly now the province of the Stark Zoning Commission. So that's my thing.
I mean, it is.
Huh?
It is, or it's not. I mean, it is the Historic Zoning Commission, yeah.
Yeah.
And not ours.
Yeah. The
I
ordinances are
definitely,
both.
I definitely need either clear definition on special exception or abolish it.
Well, wow, that's not this board. This board doesn't make the law. So they just try to interpret it. So right now, their input is valuable, but we need to take this to the board commission. To the
Oh, I realize, that's what I'm just saying.
I'm with you. I mean, I've been saying that for 4 years, for 3 years.
Speaking of historic zoning, I encourage everybody to attend one of the Zoom meetings. It's kind of a prelude to if they have to come to the BZA. It's working out really, really well.
So far, so good.
Okay, I have another question. I'm really not trying to harp on this, but did you say, Doug, that I think I heard you say, if someone meets the requirements for a conditional use, forget the variance. I'm not worried about that right now. If someone meets the requirements for a conditional use, as in the swimming pool would be located within the building envelope.
It's within the building envelope.
Right. Then you're saying we can't not give them that, which I don't disagree with. My question is, why do we have to see it at all?
Well, that's another allowed on my beach. Bellmead is the only city I know of that sends swimming pools to its board of zoning appeals. However, it's a special place. I don't know if you do. Once again, if it's compliant with setbacks, it's within the building envelope, then I think you're talking about the same types of stricture, same types of conditions on every one of them. Screening, landscaping, fencing.
But again, those are already conditions laid out in the ordinance that they would have to meet, right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah, okay.
I don't like to go to meetings. That's something I hit the door 3 years ago. I asked Lyle why we did this, and anyway, it's okay. We got all sorts of stuff, in my opinion, that is not necessarily tennis courts, gazebo, all this stuff. I don't understand why the BZA is doing it, honestly. No offense to you guys and gals, but
Well, let me defend the board's role in swimming pools. I can think of a couple of examples where what the board did because of neighbors, one reason because of the neighbors, and then because it just made sense, they had the applicant come back with a smaller pool because the pool didn't really fit the lot that well. And I can think of 2 cases, one on Walnut, and the other on the end of, I think it was Royal Oaks Place, where they, where we helped them find a path where everybody was happy. So if it was just automatically approved, unless there's a pool to lot ratio,
yeah.
But then you have to take in, is it a narrow lot? Is it a wide lot? If it's a narrow lot, you're going to be closer to your neighbor. So there are some, there is a benefit to the ordinance for it coming before the board. There's a benefit to the community for it coming before the board. That's just my 2 cents worth.
I just think most cities make a legislative decision about that. They might say pools should not be allowed on lots smaller than half an acre. That's going to always create a problem. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I know Larry Wick went nuts when that was suggested one time in an ad hoc meeting.
Oh, really?
He just said that he just believes
I
that.
don't want to know about any ad hoc meeting.
That
You know how it feels.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, and then also on the term of the term hardship, I think is throwing me off because it seems like not being able to have a swimming pool is not a hardship. I know I cannot decide that, but you know what I mean? It's like not life or death.
The word the word hardship in the context of variances is a little misleading, and this is happening. I've got this for 40 years. To me, a hardship is simply not being able to build your project like your neighbor could. Otherwise, you're getting into what I said is, I got my mother-in-law coming down from Minneapolis, which is the guy. You don't want to get into that. That's sort of
no.
And that's what, to me, if you get hardship, really means hardship. I mean, kids out there rattling pin cups You see a lot of that on the boulevard, I guess. But, yeah, I don't know. I think hardship's just I can't build my project. I could be wrong. I'm not with you. I mean, things like accessories, like a swimming pool or a gazebo, or things that are going to be accessory structures, which are just matters of taste. You're like, you don't need it. That's
Yeah, I feel like then I come back to, well, then does everybody get a variance? I mean,
no, you're going to have unusual situation of your lot.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
You know, it's really interesting. I don't know who would do the data, collect the data, the difference in the way BZAs around this area, whether they're liberal or conservative.
So I have a question. Is the permit that they fill out a standard permit, or are there ways to have them, do a checklist based on the ordinance of where their variances are, and they can define it? If we have a checklist, of outside the building, out, whatever, and they can put notes beside it as to what the specifics are, the measurements or whatever.
That's the question for a while. A quick interjection. There's no state law. There's no standard for statewide. So it's pretty much a Bellmead form. So whatever we want to do.
The application, basically, I allow them to fill out the reason for coming to the BZA. I try to help them with that. When I write the agenda, I spell it out in certain language that was taught to me by Bob Patterson and my predecessor, Phil Booma. When I meet with the appellants or architects, I ask them to highlight the question. Really highlight it: pink, red, blue, green, whatever it may be. If it's over on grade, if it's a wall, whatever it may be, I try to get them to highlight that as best I can. So I've actually got them doing more than they used to. So
Yeah, could they be more specific? Then they're not very specific in their description. Maybe they could be more specific if we had some guidelines in the permit, attached.
Talking about the application.
Yeah, I mean, if the ordinance, was kind of highlighted.
So you're wanting to see a section of the ordinance that is in question along with the application.
Basically. There could be different ones for different, I mean,
we get that with our agendas. I mean, we get the part of the ordinance that's being, right?
Yeah, I was taking certain parts of the ordinance and highlighting them and sending them, but after a while, I mean, how many times do we need to look at a pool?
No, I mean, not for us. I'm not saying for us. I'm saying
for the applicant.
that there's a checklist that goes with whatever they're applying for, and that they have to do a little bit more work. It's not us, it's them doing the work. I mean, we're going to do the work when we are looking at the plans and looking at their application. But they have to explain the specifics of what is in the ordinance.
What you usually see, Gloria, I know in Metro, is the applicant, particularly if they're applying for a variance, if they have the burden of proof, they will turn in a letter, either from their lawyer, their architect, or themselves, saying, we're entitled to a variance and here's why. That's standard stuff. I don't think Metro's got a form, because the form is, you don't want to have a form that's so, it's not going to be large enough to include the justifications maybe on a standard form, but or maybe they'll attach it as a exhibit to their form. I think we could require that.
Well, because everybody doesn't have, I mean, the other thing is everybody doesn't have like an architect or somebody who,
I know.
But I think if we started training people to be more specific, it would be more efficient.
So, Gloria, just to make it clear, you're wanting people to specify in their own words why they're coming to the BZA in relation to our ordinance. Is that what you're?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So if they want a pool that's outside the building envelope, they just need to say, I'm asking for a variance for a pool. It's outside the building envelope. It is beyond the 60-foot setback. That's the type of thing you're looking for, right?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, there could be a very simple checklist, and they could say it's not just behind. They can say how much it's outside the setback. I mean, they would have
That's
to
on the
specify
plan.
That's
on the plan. All that information's on the plan.
Well, but we could.
I feel like
ordinance.
it would be more helpful in applying for a variance. You know, like their argument for
Yes.
why they believe a variance is something that, you know, they should be granted. And I think to not have to process all of that information when we're sitting there would be helpful to everybody, because you could sort of think it through and look at their argument and, you know, whatever. And then you could have questions already there. But most of the time we just find out what they think about it when we get there, you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be like a burden on the applicant either. But I just feel like, for me, that would be very helpful.
It is their burden, though. It's their legal burden. They have to. I find myself just trying to be a good guy in these meetings, helping these people put together their argument, just as if, you know, go away empty-handed. So but particularly if it's out there and they can't see it, but it's their problem. And I think we ought to just remind them, if you got it seeking a variance, just say you need to write it up. As you say, it doesn't have to be an architect or a lawyer. It can just be somebody saying, here's what we're, you know, maybe, Pete, is that too formal? Do you feel like that's unfriendly or too formal? I don't know.
I'm okay if you're okay.
Well, it's kind of like in any other appellate matter. You have specific reasons why you're appealing. And if we don't know their specific reasons, or the burden is on them, they need to tell us what is it about the ordinance you feel like is the reason the application was denied. What's the reason you feel like the ordinance should allow us to approve this application? What are the specific reasons? And that's not unusual. It's if it's an appellate, Doug, this is an appellate matter.
Yeah.
You know, you thinking like a lawyer, right?
I usually write a 5 or 6 page letter brief to the Board of Zoning Appeals in Metro or whomever, saying this is what we're entitled to. Not everybody has a lawyer, but everybody who's in there, they pretty much expect that.
I don't think it's unfair for us to require them to say what is it about the variance that you feel like is applicable to your particular application.
Right.
And to extend that, I mean, from a liability perspective, it seems to make a ton of sense, because what if we got accused of giving more leeway to a specific applicant on a certain day because we had 2 alternates or whatever, and they found things that they felt like we were more generous about with that particular lot than we would have been with another one. If we can base it on their argument, not our own that we come up with, that would be amazing.
And
I would love that.
Doug, the question becomes, are we bound by this? So what if we find another reason to approve it or disapprove it for that matter? Are we limited to the specific wording of their appeal?
No, you're not. You're not.
Yeah.
You have to consider all the evidence, but if you or your attorney or Lyle as a building official give you information or insights about the matter, you have your own information or insights about it from having seen the property, that's all fine. That's all fine.
Well, for those of you that are in favor of that, if you would, just shoot me an email in the next day or two, just kind of highlighting those points, what you'd like to see. Gloria, I know you mentioned a checklist. Just give me some idea so I can do my best to forward those ideas to these appellants, if that's what y'all want to do. I don't think it'll be a problem for architects, engineers, landscape designers, but you know, I think for the average homeowner asking for a wall or a pool or whatever, maybe a good idea to have them put everything in layman's terms.
May I ask you all a question? This is my addition to winter pools. Every month, we're considering fences and walls, and people not wanting to put their fence where the ordinance says it should be. Why in the world don't we either amend our ordinance to make that more flexible? It's like, talk about non-hardship. If hardship really has to do with, is this just is ornamental as opposed to protective or something? But I mean, I don't understand why we're spending so much time on fences and walls. That ought to be easy enough to reduce to an ordinance standard and say, unless you can show you're built on a hillside or something and the height restrictions are different for you, why would we ever grant a variance for a fence? I don't get that. That's my beef.
Well, I always look at the ordinance in that respect as what they can do, what the applicant can do without getting the board involved.
Yeah.
And then if there's extenuating circumstances and the lot's too big to run a fence all the way around the property, or they don't run it from the side to from the back corner to the side, they'd rather run it from the back corner to the back of the lot. That if it makes sense, they can do it. So, but I think of it as the ordinance telling them what they can do, so they don't bring everything in front of us. But there's been a lot of exceptions and good reasons for exceptions for fencing. So.
Y'all the ones doing the work, I'm just saying.
Anybody have anything else? Seeing none, anybody want to make a motion?
Doug, we appreciate what you've done. It's been helpful. And we have additional questions to follow up. Can we email you questions about this presentation?
You certainly may, or as I said, I've got a kind of a working draft of a more detailed presentation. It's not reduced to PowerPoint slides. And this is to be continued, I hope, in some way, or just call me either way. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank everybody
Thanks,
for
Doug.
attending.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.